last, or with Yuka, she received what was thought to be a terrible omen. In this next file, we'll see whether or not that was a truly bad sign from an angry god, or perhaps just yokehead superstition. Yuka thought she knew cold. In the cliffs of the copper shards, during the black days of winter, the green spirit fled below the ground to sleep until day returned once more. In those days, the sky's devil wind brought snows that filled every crag and rock face. It was a season of silence, as all souls around would hole up in their dwellings and abandon the outside world. If you dared walk in the dark, the merciless chill would choke the air from your lungs, exposed skin screamed with a strange burning, and the eyes would sear if you were foolish enough to open them towards the wind. In those fierce, deadly days, Yuka thought she knew cold. As the girl threw herself into the shallow water of the snowy shore to help haul the heaving umiak, she longed for a cliffside winter. Wind that would swallow any winter breeze from the copper shards roared at them from the dead sky behind their backs. The freezing salt water drenched Yuka's boots and seeped through the fur lining her trousers. She had altogether given up trying to use her toes to grip the ground below. Indeed, she could barely feel anything from the knees down. The last 10 days, on and off the frigid sea, were an agony that Yuka never wanted to repeat. Since the wicked omen of the dead lurker, the sky's curse seemed to follow the fleet wherever they sailed. Yuka learned more of spotting from Imik every day. The boy was amiable and talked enough to fill the long hours, but Yuka had been given other duties on the umiak. To give them extra distance in the daylight, Nanak and the Salt Sisters had their fighting women take a shift of rowing near midday to give Takani's men respite. In those hours for the last 10 days, Yuka found herself planted in a rower's plank, her lower back on fire, and shoulders aching endlessly in a sea of pain. They made a cold camp every evening on whichever was the most accessible icy shore. The umiaks were hauled onto the ice and overturned to make shelter for the night. Inside each, a small kulak was lit for each of the 3 overturned vessels. The souls inside were cramped more closely together than twin babes in the womb. Saltfish and heniper wine was passed around briefly before the exhausted crews collapsed in their skin blankets and bedrolls. After a few hours of restless sleep, were desperately attempted amidst a roaring cascade of snores and farts. There had been 1 or 2 nights where Yuka would have considered going out to die in the cold if it meant a few moments of true sleep, unhindered by Aglu's snoring or an oarsman's toxic wind. In the morning it was up and away again, at first light, and Yuka would spend another day spotting, rowing, slathering bile on the ends of the boat, or carrying a heavy skin of water up and down the vessels to all who needed it. Are these the tasks worthy of a legend? Yuka would think to herself, day in and day out. But she held her tongue. She knew full well that any comment like that would have Aglu dunking her into the frigid sea. "To cool your fevered mind," she had said to a sopping Yuka once when she was a child, and had thought to act like she was above the children she played with. Yuka had remained silent. She took the day's discomfort and was sure to soak her blistering, bloody hands in a bowl of cold salt water every night. Now, with half the length of her legs soaked and frozen, Yuka felt stone under her feet for the first time in a week. The hard pebbles that made up the beach bit into the bottoms of her drowned shoes, and the uneven ground made her pitch and stumble in the water. The wind had raged, and the sea had reeled for most of the day. Almost every shred of Yuka's clothing was either drenched or damp. For the first time that voyage, she ignored for the last time that voyage, she ignored the pain that the sea brought, and shoved with all her might against the railing of the boat, until all hauling the boat felt the bone and tanned lurker skin scrape along the dry stones of the beach below them. Yuka collapsed onto the land, resisting the urge to kiss the dry, smelly stones beneath her fingers. "Never again," she vowed quietly. "The Deep Mother blessed me with legend, and I honor her, but never will I cross her kingdom like this again." Yuka was not the only one who fell to all fours when the task of bringing the Umiaks ashore was done. Some of the nomadic fighting women who had accompanied the party on the vessels went to their knees and called out thanks to the Deep Mother for delivering them. She saw that Nanak and one of the fighting women who, like her, wore the blue-dyed skins of the nomad clans were both collapsed against the third Umiak to reach the shore, leaning against one another and trying to catch their breath. Only Aglu, the light rider, and Takani seemed unbent by the journey's end. Everyone was silent for a long time as the weight of the sea voyage ebbed. The moment of rest wore on in the sky's deadly war. After a long while, though, as if the Deep Mother was giving her mercy, the stormy gale lessened slowly to a steady winter wind. When Yuka could once more feel the muscles in her legs and the bones in her feet, she rose and walked over to her aunt. Aglu's backside was resting against the bow of their largest Umiak. The war chief was drinking deeply from a thick skin of Henniver wine. "Shall we get on with turning the Umiaks over for the night?" Yuka asked her. Aglu swallowed a great gulp of Henniver wine and smiled at her niece. "Come here, my legend." She waved Yuka over. The girl leaned against the boat next to her. Aglu wrapped a loving arm around her in a familiar gesture that had not been felt by Yuka from her aunt during their entire journey. Aglu leaned close, and Yuka could smell the salt on the damp skins covering her shoulder. "This voyage was a trial for you, girl. One of many, but not to be discounted. You carried yourself well in these days. I kept my distance. It was lonely and hard, I know. The men and women around us needed to see that it was a hard-working woman behind the legend you left behind on the shore. I am proud of you, girl." She gave Yuka's shoulder a hard squeeze. Despite the agony and frustrations of the days behind, Yuka found her pains soften a little at her aunt's words. She tilted her head towards the resting crew around them. "Do they have thoughts of me?" Yuka asked. Aglu smiled. "Well, it will take more than a 10-day voyage and a few hours rowing to get to Connie's nod, but none of my crew will think harsh of you, now that you've braved the Deep Mother's expanse with them." "Is it all land now, from here to Tungayuk?" Yuka asked, trying to keep the hope from her voice. Aglu laughed aloud. "Aye, girl, from here on it is. In fact," she pointed towards the edge of the beach where the vast forest began. "Just beyond that small hill lies spacious tents, steaming jacka steaks, sizzling fry bread, and the kindest tribe of fisher folk you've ever liked to meet." Yuka's stomach growled so loud it sounded like she had a beast in her gut. She unconsciously licked her salt-dried lips. "Just over that hill?" she asked. "Not 100 paces from where you're standing." As Aglu spoke, Yuka caught something in the air that made her give a little groan, longing for home. It was a scent that she had not enjoyed in months, not since her and her father had left the forested cliffs of home for the barren, icy north. Wood smoke. Though the soreness remained, all feelings of exhaustion left her body. Yuka rose from the Umiak. "Onward." Aglu smiled. "Aye, gather your pack. You and I shall be the first to taste the simmering meat on the air." Aglu rose. As she did, she leaned back into the Umiak and pulled up something from the bottom. It was a length of lurker bone, near as long as Yuka's arm. It was carved intricately in 100 different twists and designs. Aglu tucked the bone into the leather belt around her furs. "Do you think that I'll have a totem that holds as many stories as yours someday?" Yuka asked, nodding to the bone. Aglu looked down into her niece's eyes. "Aye, as many stories and more, I'd wager, my little legend." Yuka smiled, and Aglu raised her voice to the people around. "Takani, see that the men gather their packs and supplies. Pike the Umiaks to the beach and then fall in behind us. The rest of you," she addressed the fighting women and the salt sisters milling about on the beach, "take what you wish to carry, and let us feast among our southern friends." A small cheer went up from the women, along with the barked orders given from the hulking, sinewy figure of Takani. Aglu took the lead. Grabbing her heavy pack from the Umiak and tossing Yuka hers, Yuka caught it, hearing her mother's axe clank against the clay cup and bone dagger it rested against. She slid it over her shoulder and hurried after Aglu. As they neared, Yuka could smell more than just the sweet scent of burning duskwood. There was a freshness in the millions of green needles and dead leaves coming from the winter trees all around them. Snow still covered everything, but the entire world was not ice. Like the north, there was wood, stone, green, and life. Yuka felt soft earth below the crunch of the snow. She felt more at home with every step. As they neared, a different, sweeter smell accompanied the smoke. Yuka's heart and belly rumbled even louder as she realized that it was meat of some kind. She fantasized about jaka steaks and crackling boar bacon wrapped in fat, cakey fry bread. She had to stop herself from running over the hill. After 10 days of putrid smells and dry kelfish for near every meal, she was almost ravenous. Yuka hurried up next to Aglu as they reached the top of the hill, and they looked down to the village below. Damn the sky above, she thought to herself. The sickness of the sea that afflicted so many on their first voyage across the Black had not hindered Yuka. This had been one of the few joys she had taken over the water. What she saw below her sent every morsel of food, seawater, and bile that she had managed to keep down the entire journey erupting from her gut. The great fire that brought the intoxicating scent had died to embers, and the meat that it had cooked was burned blacker than moonless night. Piled in the center of all the fisher tents, at the foot of the high wooden village totem, was a cooked mass of dead souls. Bodies, bent and broken, twisted and cracked, steamed endlessly in the dying fire that had been set around them. Yuka couldn't breathe. Her stomach cramped and her eyes watered in the rising smoke. The smells that had been so sweet to her a moment before were now poisonous. Aglu stood straight, just behind her. What is this? What happened here, Aglu? Her voice trailed off. Yuka heard something down in the direction of the village. It was a small, strange sound, like the chirp of a small bird. Aglu moved. Yuka felt the iron grip of her aunt's warrior hands take hold of her shoulders. With a hard heave, she was thrown back hard down the hill towards the beach. The earth roared with a sudden crack. Out of the trees rose a smoke that brought with it a sweeter smell than the meat, but it was harsh, like honey poured on stone. Yuka coughed out a mouthful of snow and dirt and saw Aglu standing high on the hill where they had stood. One of her fists held fast to one of her long knives. The other was wrapped around her side. Her aunt stood alone as they came out of the brush. Well over a dozen, perhaps 2 dozen, long-haired warriors with faces painted entirely in bright white paste screamed out of the woods from the direction of the village. Some carried spears, others axes. Some carried weapons you had only seen once, long ago, from a tradesman that had come from a warmer country to the south. Spitfires, she thought. Muskets? The one nearest to Aglu hurled a bone hatchet hard at the sea warrior. Aglu whipped her shoulder back, the axe barely missing her. Yuka could see that her aunt was moving slower, still clutching hard to her side. Aglu whipped up her fist, and the blade it held, and buried it in the warrior who ran towards her. The blade sunk deep into the fighter's lower belly. Aglu then ripped the blade upwards. The warrior didn't even have time to scream before the pain took her breath away. Yuka stood, feeling more numb than the cold had ever struck her. Another white-smeared warrior, with her hair shaved down to her scalp, lunged at Aglu with a spear. Aglu tried to spin away, but her knife was still stuck in the last woman. Yuka's heart felt a cold stone strike it hard, as she heard, for the first time, her aunt cry out in agony. It was then that Yuka moved. Fear and anger, feeling like fire in her veins, she unslung her pack and with trembling fingers tried to reach for her mother's fury without taking her eyes off the fight. A black wraith shot past Yuka's left. Tikani moved like a man Yuka had never seen. He was like a fellcat, or a spirit, as he sprinted up the hills towards his master. Without breaking pace, he bent and picked up the bone axe that had just missed Aglu. In one smooth motion, Tikani hurled the axe into the chest of the nearest oncoming warrior. She was thrown back from her feet and landed hard on the cold ground, unmoving. The man-beast then drew 2 knives from a sling on his back, one long and made of steel, and the other wide-bladed, made of bone. He sprinted to Aglu's side. The woman who had buried a spear point into Aglu's leg ripped her weapon clear and swung to meet Tikani. It was then that Yuka's hand found her mother's bronze axe. She brought it out and ran forward. Suddenly she was aware of many of the others had appeared to her right and left. Nanak and the other nomad women had joined the fight, along with some of the Salt sisters and the other women who had come with them. Behind them came Takani's oarsmen. Every woman held a spear, and every man held a oar, club, or a blade. As Yuka ran to stand with Aglu, she heard two more loud cracks come from the brush towards them. More smoke rose in the air, and two of Takani's oarsmen fell back down the hill. Yuka gripped the axe tightly in one hand as she reached Aglu. Her aunt had sunk to one knee. Yuka knelt beside her. Takani was dancing around the shaved spear-wielding woman, shrinking ward cries and whipping aside her jabs with his blades. Aglu, are you... Yuka did not know what to say. Get the boats, girl. Aglu's eyes were rolling, her breathing haggard. Yuka saw the lovable bear of her youth. His eyes rolled back as she fell down to the ground. Anger surpassed fear in that moment. Yuka took the axe in both hands, turned around, and planted her feet between her aunt and the chaos. Aglu's crew were holding their own. 3 oarsmen were fighting tooth and nail against 6 of the white-pasted warriors. Nanak had sunk a spear through the gut of one of the fighters. She was now raking a knife through the throat of another. Yuka heard a click to her right and turned to see a woman kneeling in the snow 10 paces from her. The young woman's face was pasted white, but Yuka was near enough to see that the woman could not have been much older than her. The woman held, in a practiced grip, a long-barreled Spitfire. Yuka had 1 second to understand what she saw, before another roaring crack hit the air. Pain, like Yuka had never felt, hit the side of her head. The force of the shot spun Yuka. In the black haze of pain and confusion, she did not know she had fallen, and she felt the snow from the ground melting into her hair. All around was blurry. Yuka felt her eyes flood with tears and pain. A shadowy figure rose into her view. The figure held something long in one hand and something short that glinted in the light in the other. Her face was pasted white. Yuka's mind cleared before her vision. Hurling herself forward, Yuka screamed with bloody rage and lunged hard at the figure. Her hand came up and buried the bronze blade of her mother's axe into the warrior's hip. Yuka heard a high-pitched scream. She fell on top of the warrior, feeling a sharp but shallow cut sting hard into her side. Yuka pulled the blade out as the two crashed to the ground. Her vision cleared for a moment as she lifted the blade over her head. She saw the wide, scared eyes of the young woman warrior for only a moment before she buried the axe blade twice into her face. White and red splattered across Yuka's cheeks and eyes. After one convulsive jerk, the girl below her ceased to move. Yuka lay panting on the top of the dead warrior. After a moment, the shocking pain in her head came throbbing back worse than before. She leaned forward and retched into the snow. All began to go blurry again. This time Yuka did not fight it. She dropped to the ground once more, laying on her back and staring up at the cold gray sky. As the darkness circled, she heard voices around her. Dead or fled. A woman's? We should cut them all down. Beat every tree and bush. A man's. Don't be stupid. See to our wounded. An older voice. Yuka heard the crunch of snow near her head. This one. She's alive too. Yuka could not move. Her body was still, her face angled upwards. Moments before, all turned to dark. Yuka could swear she saw something in the vast grayness before the blackness took her. As 2 titanic clouds high in the sky moved different directions, she caught a glimpse of a shape. It was gone a moment later, but she could have sworn that there was something fiercely large and angular floating high above them in the sky. A lurker in the sky, she thought before she lost consciousness. A cruel omen, indeed. In the next file, we'll see if the curse follows him, and what Yuka will do to stop it.